Today's episode is brought to you by Factor. The holiday season can be such a jam-packed, busy time. And you might be thinking, how am I going to fit in nutritious, flavourful meals to fuel me on these crazy busy days? Factor is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. And they can help you to eat well for breakfast, lunch and dinner by offering chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Sometimes when life gets too hectic, meal prepping ends up taking a back seat. But with Factor, you can skip the meal planning, the grocery shopping, the chopping, the prepping, the cleaning up, etc. and get Factor's fresh, never frozen meals delivered to your door. They are literally ready in 2 minutes. So all you have to do is heat it up and enjoy. You can choose from over 35 chef-crafted meals every single week. And these meals can be chosen to meet your specific preferences. So whether you are vegan or veggie or you want extra protein, whatever it is, head to factormeals.com/reallifeghoststories50 and use code reallifeghoststories50 to get 50% off. That's code reallifeghoststories50 at factormeals.com/reallifeghoststories50 to get 50% off. Hello and welcome to 15 Days of Festive Fear, day number 13, and I have 2 spooky stories for you today. And the last story comes from September the 15th, 2023, and story number 1 comes from Juleigh. I have several stories, however they all tie together in some way. I guess I should start at what I consider the beginning. Back in 1992 or so, my mom's oldest sister Sheila passed away quite suddenly with a brain aneurysm. I was 8 years old. The night before she passed, my dad had sat me down on the couch and told me my Aunt Sheila was sick and in the hospital. My thought was, as any 8-year-old would think, she'll be okay, she's going to get better. What I didn't know, and was too young to understand, was that my aunt had the aneurysm 2 days before and was on life support. The night she had the aneurysm, my aunt spoke to her, my grandmother, on the phone and told her that she was going to lay down on the couch because she had a bad headache. 30 to 45 minutes later, my grandmother got a frantic call from my 10-year-old cousin. He was telling her that something was wrong with his mom. She was on the couch and wouldn't wake up although her eyes were open. And just to be clear, she was breathing. My grandmother said she was on her way and for my cousin to call 911. My grandmother lived 10 minutes away, but she was there in 5. Fast enough that my grandmother was able to take the phone and finish up the call with 911. My Aunt Sheila never regained consciousness. After undergoing brain surgery, she was on life support for 3 days. What I found out later in life was that the morning she passed, the doctors could not find any brain activity, and our family and her husband had decided to take her off life support. The next morning at 6:30 a.m, I heard the phone ringing in the other room. I sat straight up in bed. I just knew something was wrong. Then I heard, "Tell them I'm okay and tell Mama to throw away the brown socks." I distinctly remember thinking, what was that? I heard it again, and this time I recognised the voice. This was my aunt. I knew her voice because for as long as I could remember, my mom, my aunt, me and my cousin had spent almost every Friday night together, eating pizza, watching movies and playing games. I got out of my bed and went and sat on the couch waiting for my dad to come into the living room. I think I already knew what was coming in my own way. I didn't turn on the TV or play, I just sat on the couch in silence waiting for my dad. A short time later, he and my stepmom came out of the room and proceeded to tell me my aunt had passed away this morning. I told him, "I know, Daddy. She told me to tell everyone she was okay." He looked at me so confused. I think he was in shock from my answer. He kept explaining that she was sick and she just didn't wake up. And I said, "I know, Daddy. She told me to tell everyone that she was okay." I guess it sunk in what I had said this time. My dad paused and explained that people are very emotional right now and maybe it would be best to just keep that to myself. and I agreed. Over the next 3 days, I heard my aunt's voice several more times, always saying the same thing. Tell them I'm okay and tell Mama to throw away the brown socks. We went through the funeral and had left the chapel to head to the graveside service. I was sitting in the car with my mom and my stepdad just waiting for everyone that needed assistance to get up to the graveside. I saw an opportunity to make my way to the graveside. As I reached for the handle, I heard my aunt's voice again, but louder, but I stayed quiet. When we got up to the graveside, my mom, my grandmother, my mom's other sister, and my Aunt Sheila's husband were sitting in the chairs in front of the casket. All of us kids were standing just behind them. The pastor was delivering his eulogy and reading some Bible verses when I noticed my grandmother digging in her purse. I thought maybe she was looking for more tissue. After a minute or so, my grandmother took a balled up pair of brown socks out of her purse. I heard her tell my mother Sheila was wearing these when the ambulance picked her up, and when they got to the hospital they had taken them off. I asked them if I could keep them and the nurses gave them to me. The next thing was I could see my mom speaking back to my grandmother, but I couldn't hear what was said. All I heard was, "Now, now, now." So I leaned over and said, "Grandmommy," which is what we call my grandmother, "Aunt Sheila wanted me to tell you that it's okay and to throw away the brown pair of socks now." Both my mother and grandmother looked at me with such shock. They looked at each other for a few seconds. My grandmother said, "You need to tell her," speaking to my mother. And all I could think was, "Tell me what?" That was an answer that I didn't want, nor was I prepared for it. Fast forward to months later, and it was the week of my 9th birthday, the first week of October 1992. My mom finally sat me down to tell me what my grandmother was talking about. These details are a bit fuzzy now as I am 40 and this was 32 years ago. But in a way an 8-year-old could understand. She basically told me that all of the women in our family are special. We can hear, feel and sometimes see people that others can't. She told me that some of them may have 1 or 2 of these specialities and others, all of them. She had no way of knowing what I would inherit. She went on to ask me if I had heard my aunt or anyone else since the funeral. I told her no. It was a strange 3 days of my aunt not being able to shut up and repeating herself over and over, so as soon as I said it out loud, that was the last time that I heard her. I asked my mom if she had any of these things and she said yes, she has all 3, but it's not all the time. She said she doesn't just see dead people walking and talking all the time. She had discovered that when or if she did, she generally had some relationship, friendship or even a work acquaintance with the people for any contact from the other side. She said it didn't just happen because someone had passed her on the street. I asked her how old she was and she told me she was 16. She went on to tell me because we were all so close and my Aunt Sheila was family, everyone else was so distraught that she thought that was why my aunt picked me to speak to. She went on to tell me that maybe it wouldn't start up until later in life. She just wanted me to be prepared, since it had already happened. You have to imagine how scary it was for a 9-year-old to think now I'm going to see, feel and hear dead people. I will say, after the shock of that information, I honestly don't remember how I felt. But nothing that I recall happened again until I was 15. I'm the eldest of my mom's 3 children. In order, it's me born in 1983, my sister born in 1988, and my baby brother Alex born in 1998. Remember how in the previous story my mom told me all of the women in our family have specialities? For whatever reason, my sister has none, but my baby brother Alex also has some of these specialities, if not all of them. Little side story, my brother actually saved my mom's life just by being born. They had done all the normal blood work during her pregnancy with no abnormalities. However, 1 month after my brother was born, her doctor was doing a routine follow-up with my mom following my brother's birth. In that blood work is how they discovered several abnormalities. For some reason unknown to my doctor, my mom, who is a nurse, and still to this day myself, there were no abnormalities in any blood work before his pregnancy or throughout it either. By the way, I've been an EMT since 2006 and a medical assistant since 2016. The doctor explained, had it not been for her having my brother, these abnormalities may have been discovered too late. FYI, she had cancer. but it was caught so early that she has now been cancer-free for 20 years. My point was that maybe this is why he has specialities. Who knows? In the previous story, I told you all about my Aunt Sheila, who passed away in 1992. Alex was born in 1998, so he never knew her. When Alex was 3 years old and I was 17 at the time, this is when my mom and I knew Alex was in this little circle of ours. My mom was in her room talking with my then 3-year-old brother, and I was in the kitchen right next to my mom's bedroom door. I want to point out that my stepfather, Alex's father, was routinely in the basement, and my brother would always go down there with him. If he knew his dad was down there, he would just open the door and go down there with him. As I was standing in the kitchen, I saw my brother walk by like he was holding someone's hand. As I started to ask what he was doing, my mom beat me to it. "Alex, what are you doing?" And without missing a beat, still holding this invisible hand, he turns and says, "Me and Aunt Sheila are going downstairs with Daddy." And he turns, holding this hand, and walks down the stairs. My mother and I just looked at each other, and I literally had to run to catch her because her knees buckled right up under her. As I sat there with her, we both began to cry. She said I was so glad she got to see him. As a reminder, my aunt died in 1992. Alex wasn't born until 1998. He never met her. We didn't talk about her, and there were no pictures of her in our home, as it was very painful for my mom. But at 3, Alex knew her. My mom was happy that her dear sister got to see Alex. I was crying because all I could think about was how many of the scary specialities is he going to have. Of course, at 8 years old, I don't think anybody really understands the magnitude of what a brain aneurysm is. Brain aneurysms are just, it's so terrifying because it's so instantaneous and so devastating, and it must have been incredibly difficult for your family to sort of even get your head around what that actually means and how you can lose somebody so suddenly, and it's just awful. And making that decision to take somebody off life support is a decision that is so life-changing and hideously difficult, and you sort of spend the rest of your life questioning, I guess, whether or not it was the right decision to make. So it causes such an amount of distress and emotional upheaval that it doesn't even bear thinking about. So all that to say, sort of makes sense that you would be the one that your aunt would choose to communicate with, because at 8 years old, like you said, you sort of can't really grasp what's happening. And I think a lot of children don't really understand the concept of the permanence of death, that it is forever, whereas adults, they understand that it means forever, and grief, acute grief in particular, is chaotic and raw and traumatizing. So I can understand why she went, who can I communicate with that is going to be able to accept this? And of course it was you. And then to find out that all the women in your family have this gift of, clairvoyance or clairaudience or whatever it is, some version of this gift, is absolutely wild and completely life-changing. And I suppose for your mom, she was thinking, I'm going to have to tell her because she's already experiencing these things. I've experienced these things. All the women in our family have experienced these things. So I'm going to have to just tell her. Because what do? Do you say nothing and then your child is terrified by something that happens to them? Or do you say, look, fair warning, this may happen to you? I can see valid reasons in both approaches. And I can also see that it must have been so difficult for your mum to make that decision and decide, right, I'm just going to tell her. And in a way, it is so beautiful that Alex was experiencing your Aunt Sheila. But it must have been so emotional for your mum. And probably felt really mixed. She's probably thinking, oh, does Alex also have this gift? But also he's gotten to meet Aunt Sheila, and Aunt Sheila has gotten to see him, which is very beautiful. It must just be very difficult to have a gift like that in your family. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Around this time of year, there's such a huge emphasis on gift giving. And while I love gift giving, I also think it is incredibly important to be able to give to yourself in whatever way you see fit. It might be as simple as allowing yourself to have a luxurious bubble bath, but the holiday season is a great time to start giving back to yourself. And would you believe it, I think the best way to give back to yourself is by going to therapy. You live with yourself every single day, and therapy is a really good way to empower yourself. It is also a really good way to learn positive coping skills and to learn how to set boundaries. And look, Like I've said before, it's not just for people who've experienced major trauma. Therapy is beneficial for everybody. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible and suited to your schedule, which is incredibly important in 2023 and coming into 2024. All you need to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. It is the season of giving, and I think it's super important that you also recognise that you can give yourself what you need. Visit betterhelp.com/reallifeghoststories today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/reallifeghoststories. Customers are rushing to your store. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you to drive store traffic with plug and play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/reallifeghoststories, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/reallifeghoststories to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/reallifeghoststories. Today's episode is brought to you by Rosetta Stone. If you've been wanting to learn a new language because you just want to pick up a new skill or a hobby, then Rosetta Stone is for you. Rosetta Stone offers 25 languages from Spanish, French, Italian and German to Chinese, Korean and Japanese, and even Dutch, Arabic and Polish. Rosetta Stone has been the expert in language learning for 30 years. They know what really works when it comes to getting you started with a language, helping you remember what you've learned and motivating you to stay on track. Instead of memorizing and drilling vocabulary words, you learn by matching audio from native speakers to visuals, reading stories, participating in dialogues, and other practical language skills to fast track your ability to communicate fluently. Rosetta Stone has a patented speech recognition engine called True Accent built into the program. As you practice speaking, you'll get feedback on how well you are pronouncing words. Rosetta Stone can be used on desktop or as an app, and you can even download lessons for offline use. Don't put off learning that language. There is no better time than right now to get started. For a very limited time, Real Life Ghost Stories listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today. That's rosettastone.com/today. And story number 2 comes from Megan. My mom had me with my biological dad, John. By the time I was around a year old, they had split up and she met my eventual stepdad, Michael. I was 8 when Michael passed away and John passed last July. They were both my dad from the time I can remember and I loved them both very much. The first story is about Michael. I don't remember it myself, but my mom does. He was a police officer who died in the line of duty when I was 8. When he passed, his kids went to live with their mom, leaving me and my mom alone in our house. This event happened a month or 2 after he passed, and I was having a hard time registering that he was actually gone. I hadn't dealt with any other deaths yet. Our kitchen was shaped like a rectangle. 1/3 of it was empty space for a breakfast table. It had a huge window facing the backyard. We had a dining room as well, so the breakfast nook was empty except for my computer. Of course it wasn't a real working computer, it was one of the thick, cube-shaped ones from the 90s and hadn't worked in years. I wanted to be a teacher growing up, so my parents let me keep it to grade my students' work and send report cards. One evening, I was sitting on the floor typing away while my mom was fixing dinner. She said that I got really quiet, so she looked over at me and I was looking out the big window at nothing. She asked if I was having a hard time grading, and I said, "No, I'm just watching Daddy. He's wearing those spiky shoes walking back and forth again." He would spend weekends manually aerating our yard in shoes that had spikes on the bottom. I watched him for a few moments and then went back to typing on my computer. Like I said, I don't remember it at all, but my mom definitely got weirded out by how casual I acted. A few years later, I had another experience with Michael that I actually do remember for myself. We missed him and my step-siblings so much. We did everything we could to stay out of the house so we wouldn't have to think about it at all. We really just slept there at this point. One morning I was getting ready for school, brushing my teeth, and I saw something in the hallway out of the corner of my eye, so I turned. I saw my dad standing there, as if he were on the way to my mom's room just watching me. I've been fascinated with the paranormal forever, so initially I just stopped and thought, what's Daddy doing here? Then the reality hit me. It wasn't actually him because I couldn't see his legs. He was visible, but slightly translucent. Then I got scared. I screamed for my mom and ran down the hall and through him. Pretty brave if you ask me. My mom heard my scream and rushed to me. We collided at her doorway. I explained what I saw and she just held me for a bit. We stood there right where his apparition had been and cried a little. All the months of avoiding our home in his memory came rushing back all at once. She took off work and I got to skip school that day. We enjoyed our day at home as best we could, reminiscing. I have not seen him again, but I feel him every so often when I see a red cardinal sitting outside my window. This last story is about my biological dad, John. His death was a much different experience for me and I didn't take it the same way. Michael's death was sudden and unexpected, but cancer would be drawn out. My dad told me and my 2 half-siblings that he had about 6 months to live. The trauma of a parent dying when I was young led me to have a morbid sense of humour, but my biological dad was the same, so we got along great. I knew my dad was scared about his prognosis, so I tried to lighten his mood instead of being sad about it, saying things like we weren't saying goodbye because he would always be there. As he worsened and spent more time in the hospital, my dad, my siblings and I made it into a running joke, like him still being around to watch us. If we did anything bad, he would haunt us. His body was cremated and divided between his wife, me and my 2 siblings. A male friend from out of state had come to visit shortly after this. We had a long day at the beach, so he made a bed out of my living room couch and I went to shower shortly after we got back home. As I was getting out, I heard my friend screaming my name. I grabbed a towel and ran down the hall asking what was wrong. He was still lying on the couch, but the lights were on now, and as I entered the room I heard the camera shutter on my security system signalling that it was closing after recording some movement. I assumed it would have been from my friend trying to find his way in the dark or something. He told me that he was scrolling on his phone and heard a clicking noise. Then the lights came on and began flickering. We love scary movies and stuff, so initially he thought I was messing with him. He turned towards the light switch behind him, but I wasn't there. The flickering continued though, and that's when he realised that I was still showering. I asked if he was joking with me and he assured me that he wasn't lying. I got spooked, but I wanted to investigate some more in case he was trying to scare me. I thought about the click that he said he heard and thought of my security camera. I said that we should look through the footage. I went to the app on my phone and the timeline of activity didn't show a motion detection or a recording. There was nothing noted on the timeline after I had set it an hour earlier. But I had heard the camera shutter click, so it had to have recorded something. I reloaded and waited in case it was just taking its time to upload from the camera to the app. Nothing. Looking back, I think it was my dad warning my friend to not try anything. You see, my dad was old-fashioned and didn't think girls and boys could be platonically friends. This friend is gay, but my dad had never met him, and thus I think he just came by to visit and saw a boy in my house and got protective. Megan, I'm really sorry that you had that experience of losing two father figures in your life. I think it's very beautiful that you were able to say that both Michael and John were your dad and that you loved them both very much. And Megan, your story was really beautiful, but I will say, even though it's very sweet that you wanted to be a teacher when you're growing up and you were grading your students' work and sending report cards, which is very sweet, the fact that you were watching your dad in the garden in his spiky shoes walking back and forth again must have absolutely terrified your mum in that moment, and I think it calls for the jingle.
If they have black eyes, talk about past lives, fill your heart with dread, standing by your bed, see ghosts in their room or foretell your doom, they're a creepy kid.
Thank you, Mary, as always, for your very beautiful and musical interjection. I think that your story about seeing the apparition of Michael in your house, obviously at the time must have been very difficult and scary and frightening, but it also seems that it sort of provided you and your mum a way to release some of those feelings and to release some of that grief, which in itself is very beautiful. And lol at your protective dad, John, being like, let me tell you, you've got a boy in this house, I'm going to show him who's boss. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Julie and Megan for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from September the 15th, 2023. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra spooky content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you tomorrow.